Welcome to another episode of the California Restaurant Association Confidential Bulletin podcast. Today, we have two very special guests, Dan Spears, a good friend of the restaurant industry with BMI, and Grammy Award-winning songwriter, Tim James. Tim, Dan,
Hey,
welcome.
how are you?
Thank you, Jot. Glad to be here.
Not one to be starstruck, but Tim, I've been listening to your songs for the last few days and found myself searching through my closet for a Western wear shirt, the only one that I own. So in some way, I'm already trying to seek your acceptance. So Tim, you've had over 50 major label cuts by artists over the years. I mean, like I said, I was listening to your music for the last week, and it's amazing. Sometimes people don't realize that a lot of these artists who are performing these hit songs, they assume that they're the ones writing these songs, and they don't realize that there's these essentially poets who are writing this music, these hit songs. You had a 5-week #1 hit song by Toby Keith, My List.
hmm
Tell us about your journey. What inspired you on this path, and when did you realize this is what I want to do?
I grew up in Murfreesboro, which is right outside of Nashville. I did not really have any musical aspirations. My parents were very blue collar, and they were, even though we grew up within a stone's throw of Nashville, my parents didn't even realize that songwriting was a job, and neither did I. And after having gotten kicked out of one college and flunked out of another, and I'm not bragging, trust me, had never been on a plane. I got on a plane and went to LA, and it was an immense culture shock to say the least, but turned out to be the best thing I ever did. I was going to stay 6 months. I stayed 12 years. LA is sort of a town of dreamers. And because I played super small college basketball, as my friend said, you played, but they never even washed your jersey. But I played, and then I went out there and I got in these pickup games. And one of the very first pickup games I got in kind of Hollywood area was with guys that became, really famous actors and comedians. And one of my buddies I still talk to is the drummer in that band Tool. I don't know if y'all are, it's
Of course.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, not that Danny didn't have any, none of those guys really had any influence on my musical career. But my point is that those guys were living in LA trying to make it, and they were nobody when I knew them. But they were all very encouraging when I said I was in pharmaceutical sales. I was selling Robitussin. Can't make this stuff up, man. I was selling Robitussin, and my first Mulligan wife was an actress. Did you get that Mulligan joke? And
Yeah. Yeah.
she was a pretty successful actress. And she said to me, I would sit around and pick the guitar and sing. And she said, you're really good at this. And I thought, man, nobody's ever really told me that. So at the ripe age of probably 33, I was a member at the Hollywood YMCA for 10 years. And I found a guy that was a great guitar player. I put a band together, never been on stage, got on stage, played one night and went, okay, I see why people get hooked on it. And then I played up and down the West Coast for a couple years. And then I always wanted to move back to Tennessee because it's home for me. So I moved back here. I signed my first publishing deal. All songs have publishers, whether it's self-published, but most writers in Nashville are signed to a publishing company. So I got signed to a very small company, but it didn't really matter because they were paying me to write songs, and that's the objective. So I did that for a year and a half, then they closed up shop, and I was like, man, what am I going to do? I'd moved back home, and things were not going well. And then I got signed to a deal by a company that Toby Keith owned. And Toby came in and said, I'm going to cut one of the songs that out of his catalog because he owned the publishing on them. So he decided to cut a song of mine that I wrote with my friend Rand Bishop called My List. And then they put out the first single. The single is the song that goes to radio. So the first single was I Want to Talk About Me, which was a big #1 song. And the second one was I'm just talking about tonight. And then 9/11 happened, to be very honest with you. And the guy that was head of promotions at DreamWorks said, hey, if you want to put out something that resonates with people, put out this My List song. So they put it out, shot the video, the whole 9 yards. It went to the #1 slot in the country for 5 weeks and has since been on 11 million albums because in those days, albums sold. So that was sort of my instead of knocking on the door, that sort of kicked a lot of doors down for me. And I was very grateful to Toby and still am. And then I started getting songs recorded. Once you get that foot in the door, it's a lot easier to get access to the people that make those decisions. So then I was with that company for a couple of years, and I went to Warner Chappell and I've been with all the big publishers. But since then, I wrote a lot of songs with Chris Stapleton way back in the day. So he'll dig those up. Like I had one on the From a Room Volume 1 album that my friend Kendall Marvel and Chris and I wrote. And that album won a Grammy Award. So, that was not a bad thing to happen. You get a little certificate from the Grammy board, but you know what? You still got a Grammy as far as I'm concerned. And then I had George Strait's last number one, which was called Give It All We Got Tonight. And then I wrote a song for Lee Brice called Love Like Crazy. That was the most played song ever at one point. It took 56 weeks. The day that it entered the Billboard chart, it took 56 weeks to get to number one. So that was a big song. And then in the last 2 years, I've got one on the new Kenny Chesney record, one on the new Chris Stapleton record that Chris and I wrote with Kendall 15 years ago, and one on the new George Strait record. So, every time I get a song recorded, I go, well, fooled them again. Nobody knows.
And the Holler Back, I was just listening to that on the way. It seems to have a different tempo than some of your other music. I don't know, it's kind of rock.
Yeah, man. And it was just a fun. The guy I wrote that song with was in that band, the Lost Trailers, and we got together to write. He, was younger than me, which everybody is. He was on his phone. He was like, "Now you holler back when you get a chance." And I was like, "Man, do people say that?" Like, because I don't. I'll say, "Yeah, I'll talk to you later." And then it went on to become a top 10 song for them and got a BMI award. So, you never know. You just got to keep doing the work.
But the process, I mean, so it sounds to me like you're an active mind. You're always thinking and like you're having conversations. Is that your process? It's just sort of everyday experiences that something
Yeah.
happens, you have a conversation, you start writing a song.
It can be a blessing and a curse because it's everything somebody says, not everything, but things that people say in the course of a conversation. People like me hear them differently. And so you could say something, and I would get my phone out and go, I got to write that title down. Like I was somewhere a while back, and I heard this girl say, she was from the country. So she was like, I may not ever, I'd rather be somebody's shot of whiskey than everybody's cup of tea. And I went, huh. And so then I went and wrote that down on my phone. And then I wrote it with a guy named Brett James, who's in the Songwriters Hall of Fame. And it came out so cool. So yeah, I hear things differently than other people. And I've been super lucky. I mean, let's face it, I didn't start this till I was later. I'm still getting songs cut. But the process is Mike Reed, who wrote I Can't Make You Love Me, and also played 10 seasons in the NFL. And he's had like 10 number ones. After I had my list, I wrote a song with him, and I just said, "What's the key to this?" And he's about 6'6", and he looked at me, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, he's going to slap me with those bear claws." He just said, "The process or the key is to show up for work." So I treated it like a job. Like for 10 years, man, I went into town every day and wrote a song almost every day.
So where into town would you go? Is there an office and you sit down? Like you talk to people about, whether you're a writer, you're writing a book or music. And do you find that sometimes you're just sort of tortured? You got to write something. You ever like writer's block or songwriter's block?
Yeah, all of that being accurate. Because I've had a publishing deal for the better part of 24 years now. They have offices. So yeah, you just sit down in a room with somebody, and sometimes it's a stranger. I mean, it's a very learned process and behavior because you really find yourself sitting down with a stranger going, "Well, tell me your story." And then you tell them yours. And sometimes, you write about your life. Sometimes you just get a good idea and write the idea. It varies from time to time.
So 12 years in LA. So that's where it took off at the tender age of 33. It just sort of one thing led to another, right? People that you just happened to be playing basketball with, relationships. You started strumming on a guitar. Someone told you you're good at this, and that was the moment that you're like, I'm going to do this. I'm going back to Nashville. I'm going to be a songwriter.
Like I said, I always wanted to move home. My dad was getting older. He's since passed away, but I said, after 12 years, I loved LA. I really did. And I still do. So it was so good for me in the sense that it opened up so many different horizons. Just for me to see things out of my small town viewpoint was that alone was worth the 12 years. But yeah, it allowed me to pursue music. And when I said to my friends, I'm going to play music. And the first gig I had at a place in Reseda, all my buddies came and they didn't know what to expect. They thought this guy could be awful. And I was not great, to be honest with you. But once I did that gig, I went, okay, man, I see how people get hooked on this.
Yeah, LA it's an entertainment town. A lot of people don't realize, whether it's, the music industry, whether it's, the movie, sort of industry, television, entertainment, everybody's in it. I mean, you can't go to LA and meet three people when two of them are somehow connected to the music industry, to the entertainment industry, even if it's just, you're a set designer or a makeup artist
Right.
or a
Absolutely.
sound mixer, right? But then there's that creative class, yourself included, right? Whether you're an actor, there's a network of people. But show me a server in a restaurant in Los Angeles, and I'll show you an aspiring actor.
Right.
Or
Right.
right?
Well,
Did you?
yeah, absolutely. And again, I think people outside of LA don't understand that. So instead of being critical of them, what I would say is, I try to embrace people that are chasing their dreams because trust me, I've been there.
Yeah. So then Toby Keith then was the first song that you wrote that made, 5 weeks at number one. Was that the first song that you wrote that was where Toby Keith is performing it? What was that like to hear?
It was crazy. I mean, again, you got to remember that's the goal of every songwriter is to get a song recorded and subsequently get that song on the radio. Now, whether you get it on the radio is not up to you. That's up to the record label and the promotions team and so forth and so on. But yeah, man, it was unbelievable because I had only been back here, Jod, about, I'm going to say 2.5 years when he decided to record that song. And then when they put it out and it went to number one, you go from a 30, at that particular time, I was probably 38 years old. You go from a 38-year-old guy that people look at and go, you're way too old for this. Like you go to the Bluebird Cafe and you got those guys in there that are either they were 38 and 40 and they had multiple number ones, or you got people that are in their 20s. So for me, yeah, man, it was, I mean, you are driving down the road and the radio guy says, "This is Toby Keith's new single, My List," and I had to pull over. Put it that way.
Incredible, incredible. So the Bluebird, I've been to the Bluebird Cafe one time, and it was Dan Spears, who I'm going to be talking to later in the podcast. I was in Nashville. He said, "You're coming to the Bluebird Cafe with me," and I've heard about the Bluebird Cafe. It's just iconic. If you play at the Bluebird Cafe, you've arrived apparently. And so I'm going there with him and thinking, this is going to be this big venue and it's going to be sort of palatial and it's going to be fancy. Next to a friggin' dry cleaner in a strip that you could fit like, shit, I don't know, 20, 30 people, it felt like. It's crazy how that has become the place. But he took me there. The cast of the movie Wheeler, they were playing the songs from the movie. But then I ended up watching the movie, of course, because I met these performers. And it was the storyline you would identify with. It's about a guy in Texas who's in his 30s trying to make it big. And people are saying, you're too old, and he ends up making it big. It's a great movie.
I think I may have seen it, Jod.
Takes place in Texas, and then, then of course it ends in Nashville where he makes it big. And that's sort of like your story,
Well, I mean, it's worked out super well for me. I guess the best way to put it is because I would submit to you that most people that are creative need some form of validation. And the way you get validated is to have success. So for me, having started late and then, having had, I've had 7 BMI awards, which means you're one of the top 40 most played songs of the year. And then within that, I have 3 number ones, and then I have a Grammy Award. If you would have told a 35-year-old Tim that would have been the case, I would have called BS on that in a heartbeat. So I have to remind myself that even though Do I still want to be relevant in the game? Yeah, absolutely. But I also have to realize I have done what I set out to do. So I'm super grateful.
And your earnings, because you're not, I've seen recordings of you playing your songs in, various locations, but you're writing music for others, and that's how you earn your money, right? I mean, that's how we all get to hear this amazing music that you write through other performers.
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of like songwriter. I do a fair amount of corporate shows, and then I do some festivals with Dan Spears, and I play out a fair amount. I still do like a band gig once a year, but I got to be honest with you, like, after 3.5 hours of jumping up and down and screaming, keep your hands to yourself, my freaking back is hurting. Monetarily, your biggest rewards come from songs being on the radio. And, whether this is a segue into, the restaurant lodging deal, you know, everybody has to get a license. And when people say, why, like I have friends that own restaurants, and they're like, dude, why do I have to pay a $400 license? You know why? Because it's intellectual property. And when you're playing that in your restaurant and people hear it or they go, oh, I love that song. Well, those pennies, those fractions of pennies feed these two kids I got. I don't know where they came from, but no, I'm kidding. My two daughters are not even here, but that money goes, that's how I make my living. And whether it's pennies, those pennies across the globe add up.
Yeah, and we've heard from business, retail, restaurant tours who, don't understand like these licensing fees. Where do they go? I mean, I've seen many studies that suggest. I mean, we're in the business of creating an experience, and I think a lot of times people don't understand that the restaurant business, the restaurant industry, restaurateurs, and songwriters feed on, there's a symbiotic relationship there, right? Songwriters earn an income based on, the licensing fees that are paid. And you talk to any owner of, a casual restaurant or a bar that plays music, they'll tell you that music is a major part of the atmosphere and the experience you're creating. And there's also studies that suggest that, if you can get people into a mood, you're creating a mood, they're going to want to stick around longer. You're going to see revenue go up the longer they stick around, the more they come back because they're like, this place plays great music or they've got live music. So yeah, we're kind of in the entertainment industry as well, restaurateurs.
Right. And I totally identify with that. Again, if a restaurateur came up with a signature dish and then another guy just sort of stole that dish, he's going to go, whoa, wait a second. I don't know that. I don't really know the legal repercussions of that. But I know that when you create something, in my case, that's songs, and then you use that to create an ambiance or to pull people in or to make that experience more memorable, I helped you do that. So in turn, I have to monetize that. And the way I do that is licenses.
Right. Otherwise, you don't write music. You go back to selling Robitussin, and and then we're worse off because of it. Let's say you're inspired. I'm going to write a song. How long does it take? A day, a week, a month? I mean,
No, everybody's different. Job for me, I think I'm pretty quick just because I kind of feel like I know if somebody says, I got this idea, I kind of feel like the verses have to relate to the chorus has to wrap up the verses. So after, 30 years, you kind of figure out the drill. Now, I got to be honest with you, I haven't figured it out completely, but I've had success again to the point that I go, if you would have told a 40-year-old me or a 30-year-old me that I would be in this position, I would have said no chance. Now it's changed because, country's not as country as it was, obviously. And I'm getting older and the young guys, man, they're on a different kind of vibe, a different wavelength. But again, I'm still getting songs recorded by major acts, Kenny Chesney, Stapleton, George Strait. So, as long as they'll let me do it, I'm going to keep doing it.
okay, so here we are on a Thursday. When's the last time you were in the office trying to come up with something?
Well, I have a little studio upstairs, and I had a guy here Monday, And we started a song, we didn't finish it. My 16-year-old daughter is incredibly musically inclined, and she and I wrote a song the other night before she took off for volleyball camp. And I still do it on my own. I still enjoy the process. For me, sitting down, I keep a little gut string guitar right by my chair in there. And when I wake up from my third nap of the day, no, I'm kidding. I'll pick up the guitar a lot of times, and sometimes I'll just play something, and I'll go, man, that sounds so cool. And I've got on my little voice memo recorder, I bet I've got 2,500 recordings. And sometimes I'll go back through and listen to them and go, yeah, that's crap. And then sometimes I'll listen and go, okay, I definitely have to chase this idea, and I'll run it past somebody I work with. And sometimes they'll go, nah. Or sometimes they'll go, man, I love this. So just never know where it's going to come from.
You've got an audience of restaurant people right now. If someone said, I want to hear like the song, the one that you're most proud of, the song that you think, is a major hit but didn't make it there, which one is that one?
Well, the first one would be a song called Love Like Crazy, because I wrote that with Doug Johnson, and we kind of wrote it about our parents. And my dad had passed away about 6 months prior to that. Probably not even 6 months, but this goes back to the conversation we're having earlier, because my dad would say things like, just go to work and do your best and don't outsmart your common sense. And so I ended up going in on an afternoon writing appointment with Doug Johnson. I didn't want to go. I was like, man, I don't give two craps about writing a song right now. My dad just died, but I could hear my dad going, go to work. So I went and I told Doug, I said, man, I just want to write a song about my dad. And we wrote the song Love Like Crazy, which was a big hit for Lee Brice. That's the song I would say, especially in today's climate, dude. I say this when I play that song out loud, man, there's plenty of hate to go around the world, brother. You better let that go, like, especially right now. But without jumping into that kettle of fish, the song that I wrote a song with my friend Rivers Rutherford, who is also in the Songwriters Hall of Fame. When I say also, I mean Brett James and Rivers. And it's called So I Sang. And we ended up writing it with Darius Rucker. And it's on the album called Southern Style. But it is sort of a story about, how I came to the conclusion that I needed to do this. It was more of a calling than anything. And that's the song it was a song I'm still incredibly proud of. I'm incredibly devastated, if you will, that song never made it. They were going to put it out as a single to radio, but they never did. The label didn't. There's nothing I can do about that, but that stung.
Yeah. So, and that's real personal to you, right? Because it's about you, right? So,
Yeah.
all right. So the song is called So I Sang. I'm listening to it before my next meeting today. Wow. What a pleasure having you, Tim. So appreciate you making the time. You're an extraordinary talent, a poet, and your story is amazing. I was expecting to get this, oh yeah, when I was, 13 years old, I aspired to be a songwriter and a musician, and we got a completely different story. I will buy Robitussin in the upcoming cold season, and every time I take a shot of Robitussin, I'm going to think of Tim James.
Well, I'd rather you go buy like my latest, EP on Apple Music, but no, I'm kidding. No, man,
Well,
I appreciate y'all having me.
I'm going to do that.
If you want to hear some of my music, you can go to Apple Music, and I have an EP out that I actually did like 2 or 3 years ago. It's called Hate Me, but it's just Tim James, just like it sounds. It's not a stage name. And yeah, support live music.
Yes, Hate Me is the LP.
That's it.
Hate Me?
Hate Me.
Okay. All right, everyone. Download Hate Me on your favorite digital music platform. Tim, it's been an honor having you on the podcast, like I said at the beginning. And, to all of the restaurateurs out there who wonder where your music licensing fees go, it's to extraordinary artists and poets like Tim James, a Grammy Award winning songwriter. So thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Jot.
Okay, Dan, again, thank you for being here. We just had a fascinating conversation with the super talented Tim James. Thank you for helping us get some time with him. It was amazing to hear his story. Very different than some of the songwriter stories you hear from songwriters like Taylor Swift, who started at a very young age. He was he started at the ripe age of, in his early 30s as a Robitussin salesman.
Yes.
It's crazy.
I think he had his first number one at the age of 40 or something. So it's never too late.
It's never too late. Yeah. So, Dan, tell us, BMI and some of the other licensing agencies, are working really on behalf of the songwriters to make sure they're compensated. Tell us the importance of, BMI and the work you do, just briefly, and then we'll get into some more detail on the business.
Well, thanks, Jot. Always good to be with you. So Tim James is the perfect segue into this conversation because BMI represents a multitude of songwriters, many of which are performing songwriters like Taylor Swift. But BMI, like these other licensing organizations, or as we call them in the industry, performing rights organizations, we represent what's called the public performance right on behalf of songwriters and publishers, so that anytime music is played in a restaurant or a bar or a radio station, streaming platform, songwriters are entitled to royalties. This is why the copyright law created this bundle of rights in the music space to protect the creators of music and give them a source of income. Tim is one of those anonymous songwriters that until you met him, you'd never heard of him, right? There are a ton of writers like that, particularly in Nashville, that spend every day punching a time clock just like you and I do, trying to write a hit song for an artist like George Strait or Tim McGraw so that they can start collecting royalties that are funneled to them through BMI. So if you talk to a Taylor Swift or a Lady Gaga, they'll tell you their sources of income are from touring, from merch sales, from everything that comes with being a celebrity, from brand endorsements. But Tim James would tell you 99% of his income comes through BMI. And that's why whenever I have a chance to meet with your members, I help them understand that when they pay licensing fees to BMI, they're not only, of course, complying with the copyright law, it is the law, but they're helping support the craft of songwriting. Tim James is not going to go home and write a song to put food on the table and put his kids through school if he's not getting some sort of financial compensation. And so this is the way that he makes a living. This is his small business. And sometimes that's hard to explain to business owners. But when you put Tim James in front of them and he tells his own story, it becomes compelling.
So with the advent of digital music streaming and now, AI, and you have all this user-generated content on platforms like TikTok and other platforms, how has that disrupted the business and how has it impacted the songwriters?
Well, I think probably similarly, the way it's affected a lot of industries, it can be a wonderful aid and help to a songwriter, right? Instead of maybe going to the nearby thesaurus, they may use AI to figure out, what kind of words rhyme with Condi, right? But, the copyright law does not recognize AI as protected. So, in other words, if you wrote a song that was 100% utilizing AI, you would not be entitled to any royalties or compensation for that. However, if you used AI as an aid to write that song, then yes, you would continue to receive your full royalty payments for that song. But there is a concern. I mean, there are bills in Congress right now that are addressing all of that, because we've heard a lot about, some fake Beyonce songs being released where she had nothing to do with it, but they've AI'd her voice and put out a song saying, oh, this is Beyonce, when of course it's not.
Do you talk to songwriters who go, somebody could just go to ChatGPT and say, write me lyrics for a song that rhyme with this about this, and come up with something that may take elements from different songwriters, but, thousands of songwriters, and morph it into, the lyrics for a song? I mean, is that a concern?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm sure just like your industry, it's something that's evolving and, as we said before, can be a great tool, but it's scary. You're right. It's very scary. I have a friend of mine He's a retired lawyer here where I live in Baltimore. He thinks he fashions himself as kind of a lyricist. You know, his act two of his life after retiring as a lawyer is he wants to write country songs, and he can write lyrics, but he can't write melodies, and he can't sing, and he can't play the guitar. But there are AI sites that allow him to feed those lyrics in there, and jot it pops out a song that sounds like something you'd hear on the radio. They create the melody for you. They create, obviously they have an AI voice that sounds like, Morgan Wallen. It's quite remarkable. So that was a little scary. He sent it to me, and I said, who did this demo for you? Who sang this? Who did all the production? Oh, I just pumped it into this AI site that I pay $9 a month for. And that is a little scary because it sounded like a legitimate song that came out of a Nashville studio.
That's incredible. That's incredible. How does BMI handle sort of international licensing issues, especially, given the global nature of music consumption today? How does that work?
Well, we have reciprocal agreements with organizations in most countries. Some third world don't even have copyright protections, but most countries have organizations just like BMI, performing rights organizations, that represent songwriters in their country. BMI does not have jurisdiction to license outside of the US, but what happens is we have a reciprocal agreement, let's say with Jazz Rack, which is the equivalent of BMI in Japan. So that when a Taylor Swift song receives multiple spins on radio stations in Tokyo, Jazz Rack is collecting licensing fees from those radio stations and those businesses in Tokyo that are playing that Taylor Swift song. They collect those licensing fees from their businesses. They pay those fees to BMI, and then we turn them around as royalty payments to our songwriters. Much the way if a Japanese songwriter got some traction with their music in the US and it was getting radio airplay or performances in restaurants or bars, we would collect those fees on behalf of Jazz Rack, pay Jazz Rack, and then they in turn would pay royalties to the songwriter. So if you're a BMI writer and you have some success like a Tim James, you get your quarterly statement from BMI that lists where all your royalties came from. And it will say, oh, you got 100,000 performances in Japan. You got 500,000 performances in the UK. And then you had all these domestic performances, either through bars and restaurants or streaming platforms in the US or commercial radio. So that's why I always tell when I speak to restaurants, whether they're in California or Ohio, and I say, listen, if you have a BMI agreement, and then perhaps you do a Cinco de Mayo party where you're playing Mexican music, or you've got a St. Patrick's Day show that you've got Irish music being played, there's no need to secure additional licenses. We've got that covered through your blanket agreement that you have with us.
So what are the most common misperceptions about BMI that you hear from restaurant owners or small business owners who play music in their business?
I think it's they think that we represent the artist and not the songwriter. And they don't understand there's so many songwriters that all they do is write songs, the Tim James of the world. They think of BMI and they think in terms of Willie Nelson or Lady Gaga or any of these high profile artists that also happen to write songs. And they say to themselves, aren't these folks making enough money? And now you're asking me to pull money out of my struggling restaurant to pay licensing fees so that these folks can receive royalties on top of what they already receive in income from tours and merch. So I think the common misconception is most of the songwriters that we represent that 100% rely upon us are anonymous, and all they do is write songs. They can come out and play the guitar and sing a few songs at the Bluebird Cafe in Nashville, but for the most part, that's not their strength. Their strength is writing songs, and they have to receive this income or they aren't going to be able to make a living. And whenever I get in front of any restaurant owners, I'm always making it clear to them what an important role they play in the music ecosystem. They don't realize it. Their lawyer says, pay these fees or you'll be sued for copyright infringement. Well, the lawyer's not wrong if they've got music, but they just don't understand how crucial it is for them to pay those fees so that songwriters can continue to create songs. So whenever I get an opportunity, whether it's on a podcast or making a presentation at one of your conferences, I always want to thank any restaurant owner that's within earshot for what they do to support the craft of songwriting. Because without restaurants playing music, songwriters aren't making a living.
In fact, in my conversation with Tim, that's what we discussed, that we both help each other out in terms of, creators of music and, restaurateurs, because, the ambiance that's created in, a restaurant environment, music is very important in many of those settings. And we are, in a sense, in the entertainment business as well. We're providing an experience
Sure.
and entertaining,
100%.
our guests, and music's part of that. Yeah, I guess, so the misperception is nobody's shedding economically a tear for Taylor Swift, but yeah, it's just not knowing that for every Taylor Swift, there's hundreds of people who are struggling to crank out lyrics for songs that famous people sing.
And I think the other thing they don't understand, and this is another point that I always try and make, they're concerned where the money's going, right? They think it goes into a black hole or some lawyer's pocket. And I always make it clear, and this is something that's published, and we talk about openly, is that 85 cents of every dollar that's paid to BMI by a restaurant is going to songwriters and publishers. And we as I said, we publish this number. This is a hard and fast fact. 85 cents out of every dollar. That's pretty good. So that's why I can make that statement. When you're paying those fees, you absolutely are supporting songwriters in doing so.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who the songwriter was, but I think he is also a performer, but I think his heyday of songwriting was back maybe in the 70s. And Dan, it was in an event that you helped put together, and you had him there, and he played some great songs, but he also told the story about, he's written some iconic songs sung by other performers, but his, best songwriting days are maybe behind him, and he relies on that income that he gets from BMI. And you said it's a quarterly, so
It's
these
quarterly.
songwriters get a check in the mail quarterly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was struck by the conversation with Tim, how, I just asked him about his process. And he says, he gets up in the morning and goes to the office and sits down in the offices, wherever they are, and, just breaks out the pad of paper and the pen, and he's writing songs, trying to come up with lyrics.
Yeah.
It's like a job.
Yeah. It's no different than what you and I do. That's why I always use that phrase, punching the time clock, because that's truly what they do. Every day they go in and, BMI has writing rooms, publishing companies have writing rooms. And so sometimes they literally are going into an office. And there are some songwriters that go in and meet that formula of what is popular on the radio today, right? Let's write that hit song that meets all the criteria that fans want on the radio today. And there are some that do that. It's very businesslike. But then many songwriters, they can't write that way. They just have to write what comes out of their heart, what comes out of their head. And if it happens to resonate with a big artist, a Keith Urban who wants to record it, then fantastic. But I know a lot of writers who are Hall of Fame writers that have said they've never written songs where they specifically said, I'm going to write this song for George Strait or Keith Urban. I'm just going to write a song that comes from my heart, and I hope it resonates with somebody.
And that seems to be the type of songwriter that Tim James is. I don't know if you can tell this story, but we were having dinner, and you told this fascinating story about when you first met Taylor Swift.
Well, it just goes to show, everybody started out somewhere, right? They just didn't become an instantaneous star. I think I alluded earlier to the fact that when I get in front of business owners, whether it's a restaurant owner or a radio station owner or a hotel general manager, I always try and, if I can, in addition to doing like a music licensing 101 presentation, I try and integrate a songwriter performance into that presentation or later on that evening at a conference dinner or whatever to humanize what we do. Because I think when a restaurateur sees that there's a human being at the end of the food chain, it's more compelling for them and makes them feel a lot more comfortable paying those licensing fees. So a songwriter is my best brochure for BMI. I can speak till I'm blue in the face about BMI and the importance of respecting copyright. But when I put a songwriter in front of them, they say, hey, listen, thank you all for paying those fees. That's how I put my kid through school. We were doing an event for a radio company called Beasley Broadcasting, one of the larger radio groups in the country. They own a big country station in Philadelphia. And so they decided to have their annual managers meeting in Philadelphia, kind of hosted by the radio station there that has a country format. And they said, listen, would BMI be willing to bring in a songwriter to perform at our closing dinner? We want somebody that BMI thinks has a shot of being someone special. So, okay. So I contacted my colleague in Nashville and told him the situation. This is a great opportunity for one of our young up-and-comers to get in front of a very important group of radio executives, influential radio executives. Anybody you can think of who might appreciate this opportunity. And he said, yeah, I've got a great young talent who we've just signed to BMI. She's got a lot of potential, and she's from outside of Philadelphia. She's from Pennsylvania, so it would be kind of a nice local tie-in. So I meet Andrea and her daughter, Taylor. She's wearing these sparkly boots and long frizzy hair. She's 15 years old, and she's kind of quiet, very nice, very polite. And we spend the weekend getting to know each other. And the time comes for the performance that Saturday night. And one of the things that this radio group does, it's a tradition every year at their annual managers meeting, is one of their general managers would get up and do this really corny roast of his fellow general managers based upon maybe silly things they had said over the last 2 days of their meetings. So he'd finished up his little 20-minute roast, and they invited me up to introduce Taylor. So I do my little shtick and introduce her. She comes out and she says, hi, everybody. My name's Taylor, and I just signed a record deal with this new label called Big Machine Records. In fact, the CEO and the owner of Big Machine is over there in the corner. His name's Scott Borchetta. By the way, Scott Borchetta started this label just to sign Taylor because he was so convinced that she was going to be a star. So he's in the corner, and she looks at him and says, Scott, you're going to be really mad at me because I know you want me to play a song that's going to be my next single, my first single on radio, but I don't want to start off with that song, Scott. Would you guys be okay if I performed a song that I just wrote? Now, Jot, these are a bunch of jaded radio people that sort of feel like they've heard it all. They're like, oh, okay, you go ahead. You play that song you just wrote. Well, she proceeds to perform a song that she'd written based upon that guy's roast. So she couldn't have had more than 2 or 3 minutes to write this song. And she incorporated all the lyrics from his roast into a pretty darn good song. Well, at that point, this jaded group of broadcasters, suddenly they were stunned. You could hear a pin drop, and she had them in the palm of her hand the rest of that performance. By the end of that show, every radio station that Beasley owned from coast to coast said, we want to book her for our next music festival and this and that. What a great opportunity. 6 months later, Tim McGraw was a top 10 song. I think her asking price for festivals and stuff was probably, I don't know, 15 or 20 grand, but she honored every single one of those commitments and performed at all these festivals gratis. And that all happened by just simply getting in front of a group of influential broadcasters and just showing how special you are. I mean, I've worked with a lot of what I consider to be incredibly talented up-and-coming songwriters and artists. But I've never, ever seen someone take over a room like that, particularly at the age of 15. Talk about being wise beyond your years. It just showed her maturity as a songwriter. And again, in front of a very important audience that, as I said before, has heard it all, seen it all. And she absolutely had them right there. It was pretty powerful. It really was.
Amazing. And BMI, I mean, yes, the headquarters is in Nashville, and that is sort of ground zero for the country music scene, but it's not just country music writers. I mean, I remember being at a BMI Awards with you, and you were honoring Pink.
Yep.
She's not a
Yep,
country.
that was the Pop Awards in LA. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
We have, I think, the most diverse catalog of any performing rights organization. I mean, we represent all genres. We're very strong in rock, pop, Latin, obviously country, Americana. Yeah, we don't specialize in one genre. It's a broad-based catalog with a broad-based roster of songwriters for sure.
Well, Dan, so appreciate you taking the time to educate us about the importance of BMI, the work you do, the music licensing business, and how it supports those that help us provide an entertaining environment and ambiance in our restaurants. Hopefully, this has been educational for our members. And also, if you're a member of CRA, you get a discount on your BMI licensing fees, which
That's
is
right.
which is amazing. And I think, Dan, I'm going to be seeing you probably in a day or so at a
You will.
conference. So
You will. But John,
look
I need
forward
to
to
thank.
seeing you in person.
Yeah, I need to thank you for not only your friendship, but your support over the years and your association support. We can't educate business owners without the help of our association partners. And you in particular have been so special to me just because of your passion for music and the fact that you're a musician yourself. So you kind of get it. So it didn't take a lot of educating to help you understand what we do and why it's important. So thank you for playing such an important role in helping your members understand why we exist and why they need to do business with BMI and the other organizations in that space.
Yeah. Well, we're, it's important work and happy to do it. And you're a great friend and appreciate all the many years of conversations we've had about music, and just keep up the good work.